Welcome, folks, to another episode. I am your host, Evantz Saint-Gerard, real estate agent here in Queens, Long Island, Brooklyn, the Bronx. And my special guest, I'm going to let him introduce himself. Special guest, please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Michael Freed. I'm a partner in the matrimonial and family law firm of Berkman, Botker, Newman, and Shine. We have offices in New York City, Westchester, Long Island, and Florida.
Michael, thank you so much for being on this episode. We did a video before, and a lot of people wanted more answers to some of the questions that they have. So that's why we're doing a few more. On today's topic, we're talking about what happens to the house in a divorce. The options are usually sell versus buyout versus stay. So I'm going to let you dive deep. The
Sure.
floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Evans, and thank you for having me again. It was a pleasure being on your show last time. Looking forward to another interesting session today. So yeah, today we're going to talk about what are the options when you're involved in a divorce and you're dealing with the marital residence. And in New York, we're what's called an equitable distribution state. Equitable doesn't always mean equal, but what's fair. And so when we're dealing with real estate, the first thing we're dealing with is whether the property is marital property or separate property. And marital property, just for your viewers to understand, marital property in New York is any property that was acquired from the date of marriage up until the start of a divorce action. The start of a divorce action is the filing of a summons and complaint. Separate property is any property that was acquired before the marriage or by gift or inheritance, whether it's before or during the marriage, and that's excluded from equitable distribution. And when we're talking about real estate, there is an exception. So just to go back a second, when we're talking about separate property, let's say one of your viewers had a parcel of property that was purchased before the marriage, and during the marriage, the property appreciated due to their efforts, okay? The efforts during the marriage, whether it's sweat equity or whether it's financial, monies that are going in for contributions during the marriage, that appreciation, if it's what we call active appreciation, it could be deemed as marital property. If it's just that the property went up in value because because of the market, that's passive appreciation, and that's not included as marital property. So, in terms of options, when people are going through divorce and they have a home, the options, like you had said, Evans, is there's three real options. One is that this usually occurs when there are smaller children involved, where one party is going to say, I want to stay in the home. I don't have the money to buy out my soon-to-be ex-spouse, so I want what's called exclusive use and occupancy. And what that is that there's no change of title. So both parties are still on the deed to the home. And at a certain point in time, that home is going to be put on the market, and the other spouse would then get his or her share of the equity. Now, that's not usually a popular way of handling the sale of a dealing with a marital residence in the event of a divorce. Why? Because then that party that's not in the home, they're not getting their share of the equity. And it may be for a few years. So oftentimes we get pushback on that. So the other option, of course, is dealing with a buyout. And what do we do in terms of a buyout? Well, in that instance, we usually work on getting an appraisal of the home. And usually what we do is both sides will agree upon a neutral real estate appraiser to come in and get what's called the fair market value of the home. And once that fair market value is determined and we figure out then what the equity is, and the way we figure out the equity is we look at the fair market value less the outstanding mortgage. If there's a mortgage, maybe there's a home equity line of credit. We'll take a look at what all of the debt is and deduct that from the fair market value to come up with a net number. And usually, even though I had said that equitable isn't always equal, when it comes to real estate, most of the time it will be divided up 50-50, especially when you have a long-term marriage. So what we do in those instances is we get the fair market value less the mortgage, figure out what the equity is, and then half of that would be what's owed in a buyout. Now, that's if I'm representing the spouse that's looking for the buyout. I say, okay, let's say that the equity is 100,000, and then I want to buy out the other spouse's share of that $1,000, I may say, well, then you have to take into consideration closing costs too. And I look at it almost like a hypothetical sale. And so take out broker's commission, take out usual and customary closing costs to reduce that $50,000 payment. If I'm on the other side, I'm saying, no, that shouldn't be taken out because that's only a hypothetical sale. It's not an actual sale. And all we should be doing is taking the fair market value less the mortgage and then coming up with the equity, and then half the equity is the buyout. So that's where sometimes the issues come up with how much is the actual buyout going to be. So that's the second way, through a buyout. And then the final way is, at least for us, the easiest way is just selling the home. And a lot of times, we're faced with issues with clients where they just they can't afford to stay in the home because, they usually, when you're in an intact family, you have two salaries dealing with, one home. But when there's a separation, a divorce, now you're looking at keeping that home, but now you only have one income coming in. So oftentimes clients come to us and they say, well, I just can't afford it. I want to downsize. So we put the house on the market. So when the house is put on the market, then it's pretty simple. We list it. The issues that come up with a sale is that if one party thinks it's worth more than the other, what do you do? So what we work on is getting a broker involved, and the selection of the broker is also a process where we may have, if there's a dispute, each party come up with a proposal for a broker, and then if neither of them are in agreement, we would have both of those brokers select one other broker, and they'll be bound to use that broker. And then other issues also come up. It's not just simply, hey, we're going to sell it and split the proceeds. What happens is sometimes people say, okay, house on the market, we get an offer, and then one party says, well, I think we can get more for the house. So what we try to do, we try to build in these contingencies in our agreements. So what we'll do is we'll say that the house is going to be listed for X amount of dollars. And in the event that there's an offer within 5% of the list price, the parties have to accept that offer. And that at least stops the issue of where somebody's saying, I want to keep it on the market. I think we can get more for it. It's like a set point, it's within 5%, you're accepting that offer. There's other instances in which house is listed and it's not selling. And then one party's like, well, I want to drop it $50,000. The other one says, well, maybe we should drop it $100,000. And in order to avoid those disputes, we have built into our agreements that within X amount of days, there's going to be a reduction of X amount of dollars. So it's simple in theory, but there's always issues. When you're dealing with divorce, you're dealing with people at their worst. And in my 29 years of doing this, I've come across pretty much every conceivable issue that can come up with the sale of a house, to the extent, and I'm dealing with it right now on a case where I have a $40 million estate. And the biggest issue, Evans, the biggest issue I'm dealing with now is pots and pans. And they think that
We talking about literally pots and pans.
almost, we're talking about personal property to the extent that they think it's worth more, this furniture and so it's a matter, and I've told them I don't do tchotchkes. I went to law school, I got my law degree. I don't want to spend my hourly rate. I don't want to use my hourly rate on I'm dealing with who's going to get this couch or this sofa, but this is what happens. And so I tell them the best way to maximize my time and energies is to work that out between the both of you. Oftentimes it doesn't, and I'm forced to deal with opposing counsel, and we're doing like, okay, we'll flip a coin. Who starts? You get the first selection, the other person gets the next selection. That's what it comes down to.
This is basically an NFL draft.
It's the NFL draft, and whoever's the lucky number one selection gets the best couch or the best TV. That's the way it happens. So that's the life I lead.
What's a mistake that you see couples make during the during this process when they're going through the divorce and it's time to sell the house? What's the biggest mistake that you see?
I think the biggest mistake are those that really think that they know that they believe that they can afford the home and they can't because they're under the perception that they've always lived there and that they're going to be able to continue to afford it. And that's why it's so important we do statements of net worth with the parties. A statement of net worth is a sworn document that lists every conceivable expense from the mortgage down to dog, and it gives you a monthly budget to say, okay, my monthly expenses are 15,000 a month. Then there's a section for income, which shows your gross and your net income. When you're in like I said earlier, you have two households, you may have enough to support the home, to pay the mortgage, to pay the real estate taxes, to pay the homeowners insurance and the utilities. But when you cut that down to one, and you have a certain amount of support that you're paying for your children, there's only so much money that's there. And I think a lot of people have this false sense of security, not understanding that in a divorce you go from two households down to one, but really one to two. But now you have one income supporting a home, and it's just not economically feasible. And I'm talking people off the ledge on this, and they're like, but I this is my home. And I said, I understand that, but this is now, you're in a divorce. You're in a situation now that you're the one that's going to have to be paying the bills. And so oftentimes I'll actually have them meet with a financial advisor to go through what they're going to end up with in a settlement and look at over the years whether or not they can afford to live in the home. And a lot of times that's when they come to the realization that, yeah, they can't keep this home and they're going to have to sell. And it's an emotional decision. It's a difficult decision, but I'm not one that I'm going to give them, I'm going to sell them a bill of goods here and say that they can afford it when they can't. So unfortunately, reality.
I'm glad you mentioned that you do offer a game plan for them to see, hey, this is the blueprint. Here's a financial advisor. You don't have to take my word for it. The financial advisor is going to go through the numbers, and like they say, the numbers don't lie.
Right.
Obviously, you have these professionals here to assist you with getting point A to point B, and based on your numbers, we want to make sure you're comfortable. We don't want to see you, get into a worse situation afterwards. So it is important that you speak to a financial advisor. Listen to your attorney, number one, listen to your realtor, and listen to your financial advisor. And then that's your team. And then you
Right.
go about your next stage. And another question that came out, hold on a second. I think it was about the deed. If both names are on the deed, can one person be forced to sell?
So when both names are on the deed, and again, in equitable distribution, title is really irrelevant because whether or not you have both people on title or one person on title, if it's a marital asset, even if the person isn't on title, they have an interest in the home because it's a marital asset. So you are going to need to deal with that asset, even if it's in one party's home. If it wasn't acquired before the marriage or by gift or inheritance, it's a marital asset. And
Okay.
so, regardless of title, that's going to have to be taken into consideration. Again, they may not need to sell, but there's going to have to be a determination of what the equity is, and the non-titled spouse is entitled to 50% of the equity.
All right. So I think, like you said before, it's important that they have the conversation. If they're both in speaking terms, take the emotion out, have the conversation, and then have a conversation with your professionals. I think my next question, it's not really a question, is basically what should people do before making emotional decisions about the house and the divorce? What's a piece of
Okay.
advice you can give them?
The best advice is to be, first of all, be very organized and pull together all your financial records, understand, where, if you have what's called that separate property claim, make sure you preserve it because whoever's going to be claiming separate property it's their burden to prove it. And if you don't have the proof, you don't get the separate property claim. So if you got from your parents, if you got money for the down payment, make sure you have that documented. Make sure you keep closing documents sometimes what happens is people buy the marital residence from the sale proceeds from a premarital home. So it's very important to be able to trace the money. And if there was, let's say, a premarital apartment, you need to have the purchase, the closing documents from the purchase, the closing documents from the sale, any canceled checks, bank statements that's showing the money that's flowing through, and then show the money from the sale of the premarital home going into the marital residence. Again, it's step-by-step tracing. So it's important to be organized, not only for the client, but also ultimately for the attorney representing the client. I'm a stickler for that. I'm very organized when it comes to going through the financial issues on a case. And I demand that from my clients because, I always tell my motto is, maybe your life, but it's my case, don't screw it up. So make sure you get me. We're lawyers. To us, evidence is food. That's how we live. So you make sure you give me enough food that I can eat and be able to establish the case. So being organized is the number one thing. Making sure you have copies of tax returns, bank statements, credit card statements, closing documents, all very important.
All right. You gave us a lot to think about. I really want the audience to listen to that last portion that you mentioned. Be organized, keep everything, make copies of everything, make digital copies, make physical copies, whatever it is, make copies. I think the next thing is pretty much when should someone call on a real estate agent and an attorney during the divorce process?
Really, from day one, if you have a home and you're looking to sell, or you want to make sure you have an understanding as to the equity that's in the home. Make sure, again, you need a team. You need to have a team working with you. As a matrimonial attorney, I need help. I need you, Evans, dealing with, the home, giving me an understanding of what the home is, the value, getting you involved in the process at an early stage is critical, especially if my clients are looking to sell and they need to buy. And I'm going to need you, Evans, to like give me an understanding of what's the if maybe they're going to rent, what are they going to, need for rent for a certain apartment in a certain area? Maybe they're looking to buy. What are the values? What are the houses going for in a certain area? So critical. And it starts really at the initial consultation. It really
Okay.
does.
With that being said, there's a lot of information here, and I know people have a lot more questions. We only have a certain amount of time. So, Michael, could you give them your contact information if they have further questions?
Sure, sure. If anybody has any questions on any aspect of divorce, also anything in terms of prenuptial agreements, because we also handle prenuptial agreements as well, you could certainly give me a call. First, my email address is mfried, that's MFRIED at Berkbot, BERKBOT.com. The telephone number is 212-791-23. And again, the name of the firm is Berkman, Botker, Newman, and Shine. And it's www.berkbot.com.
Michael, thank you so much. I'm Evantz Saint-Gerard, your real estate agent. My goal is always to put out content, information for you so you know what your next move is. If you have any real estate questions, feel free to reach out to me. My number is 917-975-5985. Again, I'm a New Yorker. I do talk fast, so I'll slow down. 917-975-5985. You can find me on all social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, pretty much all the major ones. And if you have any questions, this will be and a few other websites. We have one website that has all the videos that we've done so far and the future stuff that we have coming up and webinars. You can go to mynyhomesales.com. Look, we're looking to help you as best we can. We need to be fed the information. So feed us the information so we can help you. I hope you got some value out of this. And if you have any friends, family, or anyone going through a situation, do not hesitate to reach out to myself and to Michael. Thank you for watching and have a great day.